Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Inshallah, we'll start in a minute. Alhamdulillahi wa kafa wa salamun ala ibadihi alladhina istafa amma ba'd. Fa'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. أأنتم أشد خلقا أم السماء بناها رفع سمكها فسواها وأغطش ليلها وأخرج ضحاها والأرض بعد ذلك ضحاها أخرج منها ماءها ومرعاها والجبال أرساها متاعا لكم ولأنعامكم فإذا جاءت الطامة الكبرى يوم يتذكر الإنسان ما سعى سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. So inshallah ta'ala we'll continue with going through Surah Naziat. So yesterday we kind of completed the story of Fir'aun and Musa alayhi salam in that his struggle to try and convince Fir'aun and Fir'aun's kind of combating what Musa alayhi salam was trying to convey. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we mentioned about how Allah ta'ala shows things, His power in different ways in the Quran. So one that we mentioned is that He mentions about how we were created. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also mentions, look at your surroundings. How is the things around you, the sun, the moon, how are these things created, etc. And then the third thing we mentioned was that the stories of the past, what happened to previous nations, what were their transgressions and what were the consequences of those transgressions. And again, it's a way of kind of teaching us, how to kind of make sure that we don't kind of make the same mistakes they did. So now Allah Ta'ala is again showing us His power, His knowledge and His might in these following verses. So the first verse that I read was أَأَنْتُمْ أَشَدُّ خَلْقًا أَمِ السَّمَاء بَنَاهَا. Basically means, are you more difficult in creating, or is the sky more difficult? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who made the sky. So Allah Ta'ala is giving us a comparison here, putting things like the sun, the size of it, the moon, the stars, and everything that's in the sky basically, and saying that, what's the big deal? If I've made the sun, if I've made the moon, the sky, the stars, everything you see when you look up, I'm the one who put that together. I'm the one who's elevating the sky above you. I'm the one who's placing the sun there. I've placed the moon there. Each has its own rotation. In the night the stars come out. So if I've built all of that, and that in and of itself is miraculous by itself, because it's something that we can't do ourselves at all. This is something that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can do. Then if I've done all of that, then what's the big deal in creating you? Yeah, so there's no, creating you is nothing compared to, the fact that I created all these things. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, رَفَعَ سَمْكَهَا فَسَوَّاهَا. Basically means, and He has raised its roof and then balanced it. So samak here means the roof or ceiling. So in another place in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that the sky has pillars. And if you look at the structure of the sky, it is actually in layers. And then they're acting like a ceiling for us. You have the ozone layer that gives us our protection from harmful rays of the sun. And it acts like what a roof does in our house. It protects us from the elements. So likewise here, the sky is essentially protecting us from harmful elements. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that He's balanced it over us to protect us from every side. So this sky that Allah Ta'ala put out there, it's protecting us. Then Allah Ta'ala mentions in verse 29, وَأَغْطَشَ لَيْلَهَا وَأَخْرَجَ ضُحَّاهَا, which basically means that, and darkened its night and brought out its daylight. So again, this is very miraculous if you think about it. Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala has set the sun and moon in a rotation, so the sun comes out and the sky becomes bright and daylight penetrates through the clouds. And then if you think about it, what are all the benefits that we get from that? The benefit of the light itself. And then at night the sun goes away, basically dips down, and the moon comes out. So then that in and of itself has its own benefit. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again is just describing some of these blessings that we're getting. And then in the next verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, وَالْأَرْضَ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ ضُحَاهَا. And then he took out, and the earth after that, he's saying that he created the earth after that and spread it, ضُحَاهَا. Then Allah ta'ala mentions, أَخْرَجَ مِنْهَا مَاءَهَا وَمَرْعَاهَا. It basically means that he took out from it its water and its vegetation, greenery. Then Allah Ta'ala goes on to mention وَالْجِبَالَ أَرْسَاهَا. Then he says that he put the mountains there and established the mountains on the earth. Then why is Allah Ta'ala telling us all this? Right? So he's mentioned about him creating the sky, and then the rotation of the sun and the moon, and then the night and day, and then basically the fact that water comes down, and then through the water coming down, vegetation comes out, and then there's mountains there that are established in the mountain, in the earth. Why is Allah Ta'ala telling us all this? So the answer to that is in the next verse. Allah Ta'ala mentions مَتَاعًا لَكُمْ وَلِأَنْعَامِكُمْ. He says benefit for you, mata'an, and for your animals. We benefit from all of these things, and then not only us as humans, but even the animals benefit from it. SubhanAllah, everything Allah Ta'ala has created for us is something that we can benefit from. So Allah is telling us why He has created this whole system. If you think about it, the sun comes out, it shines, its light goes onto the plants, they grow. When the water comes down, they get nourished from it, they grow, and then eventually you get, if it's vegetable type of crops, you'll get vegetation coming out, and that's something that you benefit from. Then in the next verse, Allah Ta'ala mentions, فَإِذَا جَاءَتِ الطَّامَّةُ الْكُبْرَى. Which basically means that, and so when the great calamity comes, what the calamity being referred to here is the Day of Judgment, essentially. Then Allah Ta'ala mentions, يَوْمَ يَتَذَكَّرُ الْإِنسَانُ مَا سَعَى. The day mankind will remind himself of what he struggled in. So here basically you'll see that the person on that day will recognize, what is it that he was working for all his life? What did he struggle for in the dunya? Now, was his struggle for just earning money, or was it for things like getting ready for his prayers and that kind of thing? Or was his struggle really about, having the high life, lots of money, status, etc.? Or was it for his deen? Everyone's got their own struggle. You got guys who are just for the deen, and you got guys for the dunya, and then you got, people in between. So each person basically on that day will basically then reflect on their state in terms of what they struggled for. But you have to ask yourself, what is it that we're struggling for the most? And this is something that, again, when we read the Quran, when there's questions like these are being asked, or when Allah Ta'ala is mentioning these points, these are the kind of things that we need to take stock of for ourselves as well. Don't just assume that, sometimes verses may be addressing the disbelievers and stuff like that, but sometimes those questions are equally applicable to us. When, like this ayat we're reading just now, Allah Ta'ala is saying that the person will be reminding himself of what he struggled in. Ask ourselves, what are we struggling in? What is our struggle? What is our focus? What is our goal? What is our purpose in life? Do we have a goal even? Do we know what we're aiming for? And the thing is, if a person has a plan of action and tries to strive and struggle for something, then he takes certain steps to achieve the goal. If a person doesn't have that, then it's kind of like floating in the wind, right? You're kind of going with whichever way the wind is kind of floating. So, think about these points that Allah Ta'ala mentions in these ayat, and apply it to ourselves, so we can make sure that we're focusing, and if not, reassessing what we're doing, to make sure that we're actually doing what we need to be doing and avoiding what we need to be avoiding as well. So in other words, the consequence of this ayat is that people are going to get flashbacks and see their whole life in front of them, but obviously at that time you can't do anything, it's too late. So really, now that we are in this dunya right now, for us this is a point of reflection to say, okay, we need to think about what we're doing and take corrective action if necessary. Then the next verse, Allah Ta'ala mentions, وَبُرِّزَتِ الْجَحِيمُ لِمَنْ يَرَى. So al-Jahim will be presented for the one who sees. So it means that some people will not see Jahim and others will be made to see Jahim. What is Jahim? These are referring to the 7 levels of Jahannam. 7 gates, actually. Just like Jannah has 7 doors and 7 levels, the lightest level in Jahannam, the lightest level is called Jahannam, and the second level is called Latho, and then there's basically other names that have been given to the various levels. So sometimes Jahannam is just used to mean the whole concept of hellfire or hell. And Allah Ta'ala has mentioned all of these names of Jahannam in the Quran. So sometimes Allah Ta'ala refers to hell, but is using different names, and so these names of the 7 levels are kind of being referred to here. So then when Allah Ta'ala mentions, when Allah Ta'ala says presented, it means that they will be readily be thrown in here. Yeah. So Jahim will be presented for the one who sees. So it could mean that the person who was really sinful is made to see it, and then basically he'll actually be thrown into it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is then telling us in the next few verses how to be successful and what will take the person to Jahannam. So here Allah Ta'ala has given us now the indicators that we need to look out for. So verse 37 then, فَأَمَّا مَنْ طَغَى. So as for those who transgress, yani crossing the boundaries of the Sharia, doing things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't like us to do and told us to stay away from. And then the next verse, وَآثَرَ الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا, and he preferred the worldly life. Now there's a hadith in a book called Zad al-Talibin, which is a collection of hadith, which mentions that the love of dunya is the root cause of every sin. Yeah, so the love of dunya is the root cause of every sin. So what does love of dunya mean? Just to elaborate here, what does the love of dunya mean? Now, it doesn't mean that you can't have good things, right? People often have this misunderstanding that you can't have good things, you have to live like a pauper, and that means you're humble and you're pious. No. Having love of dunya means that while you have all these things, material things, you don't have love for those things in the heart. That's what actually love of dunya means, that the love for those things is not permeated in the heart. So you can have a nice house, nice car, etc., but so long as you don't have this kind of cling-on feeling to it, then it's fine. Now, some people get a new car, but then they're very restless. Wherever they park it, they have this panic about them. They're kind of constantly worried about their car. But reality is, that's a sign that that person has deep love of that thing in the heart. So we want to be away from that kind of thing. Now, Allah Ta'ala has made it natural for us to love things. We've got a heart, and naturally when we have something nice, there's an inclination towards that thing. In fact, Allah Ta'ala even mentions things like, branded horses in the Quran, and also mentions things like love for gold and silver in the Quran. Now, obviously, these are examples that were relatable to people of that time in Arabia, at that time when the Quran was being revealed. So Allah Ta'ala uses examples that are relevant so people can understand what they're being, in their context. But reality is, we use these things and just say, Alhamdulillah, once it's gone, it's gone. We don't get hung up over it. Another sign is, if you have a precious thing and it breaks, then what is your reaction? If you kind of feel really sorry for it and it kind of really is hurting your heart about it, then that means that maybe you had a bit too much attachment to it, and probably that was probably not a good thing. So love of dunya in a nutshell then is something that's considered as a spiritual disease, and we want to basically make sure that we don't have that in our hearts. So we don't have any major attachment to a dunya, basically, is the conclusion of that point. Now, again, our focus and our goal is basically to work for the akhirah. So we want to make sure that what we're doing is doing everything we can to attain our hereafter and make sure that's the best way. And oftentimes that means, spending your money, the wealth that Allah has given you, rather than hoarding it, spend it. So give it in charity, family, wherever you can find places to give. Now's the ideal time, month of Ramadan. There's a lot of places where people are in need, so try and help them where you can. Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith that a mu'min is he who loves for the other person what he loves for himself. So we should have this consideration and concern for others. In fact, my Shaykh often mentions that we need to be people who are selfless. Yeah, so we don't think about ourselves first, we put others first and then think about ourselves afterwards. Okay, so next verse then, verse 39, Allah Ta'ala mentions, فَإِنَّ الْجَحِيمَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى. So indeed the Jahim is their abode. So for who? So this is for the one who has transgressed and prefers the worldly life. So now the next verse, Allah Ta'ala mentions what are the qualities of the people of Jannah. So very interesting. Allah Ta'ala mentions, وَأَمَّا مَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَى فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى. So that's verse 40 and 41 together. So it means here that basically for whoever fears the station of his Lord, he stops himself from his hawa, his desires. So maqam basically means a place of standing, or the station of somebody, the status of someone. So here it means that a person who fears the station of his Lord, he knows that he's going to have to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at one point in time, and he fears that actually, how am I going to face Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Just like a child who's done something wrong and he knows that he's going to have to go and stand in front of his parents, he's going to be kind of very scared and worried. Just like that, a believer who kind of recognizes that he's going to go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he has that awe of Allah ta'ala. When he has that awe, then generally he will avoid doing things that will embarrass him in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imam Ghazali rahmatullah, the famous scholar, his classical scholar, used to say that don't look at whether a sin is big or small. Don't look at the size of a sin, if it's big or small, but look at the person you are disobeying or the being you are disobeying. How big is he? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is all about who you're standing in front of. So, it's a trap that people fall into about major sins, minor sins, etc. No. If the word sin can relate to the action that's being done, then you want to be away from that sin and make sure that we're abstaining from it. So what does it mean that he stops himself from his desires? This person tries to crush his desires and make sure that he doesn't basically step outside the bounds of Sharia. Now, here's an interesting hadith. Prophet ﷺ mentioned that there are three things that are enough to destroy you: following your desires, stinginess, and self-praise. All of these are what I would say is spiritual diseases that people can have, and obviously we want to make sure we don't have. Now the Mufassirin say that there are three steps of stopping your desires to achieve success in the Akhirah. So these are very important points. One, that a person prohibits himself from false faith, Aqidah, basically having the right beliefs. So beliefs in terms of what the Deen stipulates is a correct belief needs to be learnt, and we need to make sure that we have that correct. Number two is keeping away from sins, and then anything that's also doubtful. So as soon as you think of a sin, obviously we want to make sure we stop and don't commit the sin as best as we can. And then like that, if there's anything that's doubtful, then stay away from that as well. Because the halal is very clear, the haram is very clear, and then there's this shaded grey area in the middle. We want to basically stay away from that as well if we can. In fact, the Prophet ﷺ mentions in a hadith that a person's iman is saved from the one who stays away from even the doubtful things. So this means, in other words, anything that's classified by the fuqaha as being makruh, it's not haram, but it's considered disliked, then even stay away from those things is better for us. And then Prophet ﷺ also mentioned in a hadith that it is like a shepherd who is grazing his sheep very close to the boundary. There is a chance that they might cross the boundary. So in other words, you want to stay away from the grey area so you don't slip and go into haram territory, basically. So in the matter of dunya, if you think about the way we live our lives, we always take a precautious approach. So for example, if you invite people to your house for dinner, you're going to cook extra food because you know that you don't want to basically be running out of food and embarrassing yourself and putting them into an awkward situation. Like that also when we travel, at least I do when I travel, I always pack extra things just in case, my travel gets delayed or something else happens, and I've got enough clothes and everything else that will cover me for that extra period. So just like that, we want to do the same in terms of our deen. We want to make sure that we err on the side of caution and stay well within those things that we know are halal, and stay away from things that might be makruh. And we don't want to fall into the trap of nitpicking and saying, well, okay, this is a sunnah thing and this is a nafil thing and this is a fard thing, etc. Just stay with what you know and what's halal, and stay away from that which is doubtful, to be safe. Then in verse 41, inshallah, we'll try and finish this surah today. So we've got a few ayats left. So then the next ayat is فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى. Then indeed Jannah will become the final abode. So this is now the result of a person who stays on the right path and basically makes sure he stays away from doubtful matters, etc. So now remember the issue that the Makkans had. So just going back to the original start of the surah about the whole concept of the Day of Judgment and the fact that the Makkans didn't believe in this life in the hereafter. For them, you lived and that was your life, and then in the hereafter there's nothing. Whereas obviously our deen teaches us that actually the life here is very short and the hereafter is permanent. So here basically what's being mentioned now in the next few ayats is about the whole concept of the Day of Judgment and the kind of questions the kuffar used to ask the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So in verse 42, Allah Ta'ala mentions one of the questions. يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ السَّاعَةِ أَيَّانَ مُرْسَاهَا. They ask you, O Prophet, about the hour. When will it occur? And Allah Ta'ala then tells the Prophet ﷺ what he should say to that. Says, فِيمَا أَنْتَ مِنْ ذِكْرَاهَا. And it says, and in what are you from its remembrance? Yani, what's in it for you about the hour? So this means, why are you worrying about it? What is it to you? Only Allah Ta'ala knows when it's coming. Another interpretation of this is regarding what, and then there's a new sentence. What you are from its remembrance. In other words, meaning that you are a sign of the Day of Judgment, because there is no prophet after this prophet, and there's no shariat after this, no new shariat after this shariat that we have. In fact, there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that said, "Me and the Day of Judgment are like these two fingers." And from the time the dunya was related to the time of the Prophet ﷺ, that's been so when dunya was created and up to the time of the Prophet ﷺ, obviously a long time has elapsed, and so what's left now between now that time and the end of the time is a very short time left. So this means that the Prophet ﷺ is essentially a reminder of the coming of the final hour as well. Then in verse 44, إِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ مُنْتَهَاهَا. And towards your Lord is its ending. Meaning that the news of when the Day of Judgment is going to come is only with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then verse 45, إِنَّمَا أَنْتَ مُنْذِرُ مَنْ يَخْشَاهَا. So indeed you are a warner of whom fears it. So meaning, if someone doesn't fear Qiyamah, then how will you even warn them? Your duty is just to warn people, and then not to inform them of when it's going to come. Just warn them, tell them that it's going to happen, and then you don't need to worry about all the minor details about exactly when it's going to be. Again, that's with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nobody knows. But the one who fears, then he will take that as a warning and act accordingly. And the one who kind of denies it, obviously is not going to really take it seriously anyway. And then finally Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, كَأَنَّهُمْ يَوْمَ يَرَوْنَهَا لَمْ يَلْبَثُوا إِلَّا عَشِيَّةً أَوْ ضُحَاهَا. Which means, on that day they will see it as though they did not stay except an evening or its morning. So basically, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned that the length of the Day of Judgment, Allah has mentioned the length of the Day of Judgment so that the life of this dunya will seem so short compared to the Day of Judgment. So it will seem like it was just a morning or evening. And Allah Ta'ala is telling us that, look, for this one morning's pleasure, you're sacrificing essentially your whole akhirah. So a saying of someone is that the dunya is one day and I am fasting on that day. So here basically is the end of this Surah Naziat, and inshallah subhanahu wa ta'ala will continue with the next surah inshallah tomorrow. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept our gathering here together to go through the dars of Quran, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us all tawfiq to take heed of the messages that we're learning in the Quran, and love to maximize our time in this blessed month. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.